Om Shanti, good evening, and warm welcome to Interview with a Raj Yogi. Our topic this evening is sensing what honors the self. So, looking at this subtle power, and we'll start with a reflection. I sit here with the body relaxed, no tension, but internally, there is the feeling of attention, as if sitting here in almost a royal way. During the day, very often, my awareness towards the self is either completely neglected or quite ordinary, even though we know human life is sacred. But sitting here now, I consider the value of the self, not the external value, not connected to positions or achievements, status or relationships, education, not valuable for those reasons. Those all come and go. The eternal or intrinsic innate value of the human soul. Within my spiritual DNA, there are remarkable qualities, capacities, and specialities. And when I bring those into outward expression, I experience the dignity of the self. And that brings me happiness. Being able to remain sensitive to these virtues, specialities, qualities, and focus on how to bring them into expression. Making my life sacred, and revealing the dignity of the self. Om Shanti. Om Shanti. And welcome to those who have joined. Again, as mentioned, tonight's session is about this capacity we often call to discern. So, sensing that which honors the self. And I think that from what you've shared, even before being in this study, you seem to have a sense of um, being able to know what feels right. But not necessarily everybody can, it's maybe perhaps maybe have lost that sense. What do you feel is really important um, in terms of being able to feel what feels right, and why do we use that word feel? sensing.
So, some I know have taken the Raj Yoga course, so these terms might seem more familiar, but basically, as a spiritual being, I have these three sort of subtle or invisible capacities. One is the capacity to think, and we call that the responsibility of the mind. So, the capacity to think. Another is the capacity to discern or see or reason, and that's responsibility of the intellect. And the third is the capacity to express, and this comes under something called sanskars. So, very often we confuse the responsibilities of the intellect with the responsibilities of the mind. So, the mind again thinks, and the intellect does not think. That's what the mind really does. It might think to support what the intellect is trying to do, but the intellect can feel or see. So, in a second, it can feel. And when it's off, and there's reasons that it gets off, um, then its feeling or seeing also is distorted. So its functioning begins to become compromised. So there just might be that feeling, this feels right. And it's not about thinking my way into that conclusion or this logic. It's just this feels right. So the intellect, but things can feel right that are not right if the intellect isn't working. So it's a bit like a compass that's getting more and more off, that isn't working quite right. And there's reasons that happens, but if the compass is working well, then it will point to, just as a physical compass points to true north, this inner compass points towards truth, what's true. And so this is a good functioning intellect, and what is true, of course, will honor the true self.
I know sometimes we talk about in the course these three capacities that Judy just shared. Sometimes you kind of go in a funky place. They're like, well, so how do I know if it's what my intellect is doing, what my mind is doing?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of sort of gets a little maybe not as useful as the intent of what the understanding of these three capacities are. Um, what's a good way or useful way to help someone to be able to take what I'm learning um, and not for it to get dissected or overthink it?
Um, Sometimes in the fitness world, especially this time of the year, usually this is unusual years, so we're not really seeing this because there isn't much training going on. But usually, what happens is people will come and they have what they perceive as a problem area, and they'll say, the sort of spot training. It might be your arms or your abdominals or whatever. They'll say, can you do something in just one spot on the body? And the trainers are so used to hearing this, and they're very patient and loving, and start to explain that that's not how it works. The body is a unit. And we can't dissect it, but what we can do is train it completely and appreciate that then these different parts of the body will go through transformation, because the entire body is going through a transformation. So I will have, more arm strength. I will have more core strength. I will have more cardio because of the entire training package for the whole body. And it's quite similar to what happens to me, because the mind, intellects, and scars are in me, the soul. So if I focus on just improving the state of me, the soul, my mind, intellect, and sanskars will also function better. I need to use them. So if I'm doing a push up, I'm going to use my arms. So I need to use these subtle capacities to improve my state. But I know that things have to happen. The number one thing that has to happen is just the awareness. of me, the soul. I have to improve the awareness of the self, and that will help my mind, intellect, sanskaras to function better. But it's good to know about these various capacities because again, they've gotten very mixed up. And the more I know, if I have an engine and I'm able to take it apart and put it back together, this is great. But it's not that I want to forget about the importance of experiencing myself to be a soul and just, okay, I need to discern better, or I need to think more positive thoughts, and I'm not soul conscious at all, which would naturally lead to thinking more positive thoughts and very connected to this idea of honoring the self.
And I feel that we will touch upon that perhaps when we sort of sum things up in our second session next week.
Mm.
But I just know that it becomes something that comes up quite a bit when we talk about these three capacities.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me think about when you're walking around like, is that my liver that's feeling something, or is that my heart, or is that my lungs? And so I don't think that we think that way, but I guess we can overthink things. But in terms of this topic, I think sometimes we even take for granted that maybe we're overthinking things. I think we're so used to, at least I can only say here in the West, maybe we've intellectualized so many things. What are some signs that I'm trying to be able to, just feel what's right? I don't even know if individuals even use that word because I know some find it's a little touchy feely or maybe too airy fairy. I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually just using words that people have said to me. That's why I'm using those
Mm-hmm.
words to be able to know basically what is right, what
Mm-hmm.
is not right, what's a smart thing to do, not useful or not.
Mm. I think it's a bit of a challenge because we almost, and it's not to insult anyone, I think it's become everyone's state. We have sort of reached a point where we think wrong things are right. And, one of the words feel is one word that we connect to this capacity of the intellect that's quite involved in this. But another one is see. And which might be more comfortable or not. But very often, if someone is explaining something to me, and then they'll say, "Do you see what I mean?" And of course, I'm not visually seeing anything, but we've used this word in a very unique way in that context. Is in, do you understand? Do you grasp what's being said? So it's quite fascinating, this capacity to see or to read situations. It's not a thinking thing. It is something you feel. You sort of see or read the situation, and different people read it. And the factors that sort of distort or blur are these things that we call the vices. So if I'm feeling insecure, which is ego, I'll see or read the situation a certain way. If I'm insecure, I feel nobody likes me. So I'm going to read everything around that kind of understanding. So the vices really blind us or compromise our capacity to see and feel, but we don't know that's happening. So we actually think that it is valid what I'm seeing and feeling, and to the one that's happening to, it feels very valid, but we can't see objectively. We're so subjective at that moment. We can't see objectively that my my capacity to see is seriously compromised by these different vices, whether it's fear or stress or arrogance or whatever the case may be, or desire. As we say, desire blinds. So we will start to see wrong as right. So, how do we improve this so that I can just see clearly, read situations very in a snapshot very clearly, and trust that? Is again, I have to be working on freeing myself from the influence of these vices.
There's a question that comes up often in the Raja Yoga course. Is this capacity to feel or see the same as intuition?
Yeah. I suppose when the soul's in really good shape, it is one and the same. But there is unfortunately so much, I there's always a concern that then we'll have no trust in ourselves, and that's not at all. The first trust or faith we have to have is I am a soul and I do have these capacities and that they work well when they're not compromised by these foreign influences. Um, but yeah, I think as things go along, intuition also, just as the intellect gets compromised, then the intuition gets compromised too. It's an interesting word to use because it's that just that sense of a feeling. There might be no logic. I didn't think. I just felt in my gut. But if my gut is not in good shape, then the feelings coming from that may also be quite
Yeah,
compromised.
if you always have a stomach ache, it doesn't help, does it?
Yeah. So it's not to develop a lack of trust in the self, but just to realize the lay of the land, that as my physical eyesight starts to get, to weaken, I mean, I'm seeing, but I'm aware that it's out of focus. So what might look like a elephant is actually a turtle because and I'm aware of that. It's not that I feel bad about it. So I do things to correct the eyesight, like wear glasses. So similarly, it's to know, okay, when the intellect's in good shape, it's very reliable. So I'm aware that my intellect is compromised. So I'm doing what I need to do to get it into good shape.
It's interesting you share that, and because I've heard of many situations, you have shared it as well,
Hmm.
of individuals who have felt there's something wrong with their physical health,
Hmm.
and not able to find what the problem is, gone for tests and still nothing comes back.
Hmm.
To show anything. In one situation, it was severe liver cancer. Another situation, it was a severe brain cancer, and I think you knew somebody else as
Hmm.
well. And so, it's become such a tricky thing
Mm.
because it's then about this: how do I trust? What feels right. Those are really extreme situations, but I'm sure everybody really hopes that they will feel that before it gets too late.
Hmm.
But I think that's the case with even just day to day situations.
One thing I always, I noticed for a while was swimming. And as you can see, I have correction for the vision. Sometimes it's contact lenses. And when I went swimming, I would not obviously wear the glasses. And I would try the contact lenses, but it's always for those who have swam, they know I don't know how many times I find my contact lenses floating in the goggles. So it's not a great idea. So very often I would not. So I sort of stumble onto the deck and I know I just have to get into the water. And the reason is because the water has this wonderful capacity to, through refraction to actually improve. It's literally like a lens. So the minute I would get underwater, it's like I can see. I used to love it. It's like I'm healed. The moment I got. So going into this medium, and this is a physical example, but going into this medium of water, my eyesight would improve, my physical eyesight. There is a medium that improves our spiritual vision as well, and it's called silence. And it really does feel like water. It's, even when I would go into the swimming pool, I'd be above the surface of the water and all the noises and everything. The moment I went underwater, it would be silent, absolutely silent. And many love it almost for its meditative capacity. So that's a physical thing. I'm not suggesting you need to go under physical water, but the silence that we're able to attain through spiritual wisdom, we're able to move into a space that's it's very full and rich. It's not empty. I'm not going into an empty pool. I'm going into a body of water. Similarly, the silence is the spiritual water. And when you go into that silence, your vision improves. So what you're feeling is much improved. The intellect works better in silence. So that's something that can really help a lot. And the other thing that we of course use a lot is we borrow, if you will, God's vision. So we develop this in Raj Yoga, this develop this connection or relationship with the Supreme Being, with God, who has extremely sharp, perfect vision. And so, how does God see things? How does a spiritual being see things, a soul conscious being see things? So these are two go tos that we try to help us to learn to see properly again.
How do I take that silence then into action and interaction? Because it sounds extremely attractive, I'm sure, for many who listen. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that silence is already a very huge topic that I
Mm.
can feel we could digress, which wouldn't be a bad
Mm.
thing. But I know that we're trying to honor the topic of what we're covering this evening. But maybe we can talk about silence in another. I think we've done it
Mm-hmm.
before, but I don't know if you can come up with some quick tips for those. But how do I if I am feeling silence, and I think some struggle with, I'm feeling a really meaningful experience while I'm seated, being able to take that into action, interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Something that's obviously all of this depends on my practice of soul consciousness. Your question really is, how do I take soul consciousness into action? Is the question. But what it looks or feels like, what soul consciousness looks or feels like, we're always hesitant to say that because suddenly we'll try and go for the feeling without going through soul consciousness. But there's a reduction in reactivity when I am soul conscious. Reactivity creates a tremendous amount of noise in our head. I'm sure you're aware as you walk and move around that you almost, I mean, we could all be hired as commentators, quite frankly, because as we walk and move, we've got this constant commentary going on in our head of, oh, that person over there is wearing a red shirt and my goodness, it's ugly. And that's really, there's just this constant commentary going on in our head, a bunch of unnecessary thoughts. We're constantly reacting through our thoughts to what's going on out there. In soul consciousness, we become what we call a detached observer. So the reactivity, that running commentary in the head, goes down. There's a lot more, if you will, neutrality. And when I say neutrality, I don't mean dead. I mean there's far less unnecessary thoughts. I really just sort of leave people and situations alone in my head. This creates a huge reduction in noise as I walk and move around. So your question reminded me of Gulzar Daddy over here, who you can't see. She is the current spiritual head of the Brahma Kumaris, and many don't know that because she's not really out front. She's pretty much in silence a lot due to the fragile health of the body. She's really not, really active, as you will, one would normally expect of an administrative head. But the times that I would meet her, I always enjoyed. It didn't even matter what she was saying, and she didn't say a lot. I just enjoyed the stage because you got to see what silence looks like in action. And I'd be sitting there, and there's just a couple of times that stand out in my mind where I thought, "Oh my goodness, it must just be so beautiful in there. It's so silent." Because it's silent, there's much greater clarity. It's a bit like the surface of water. When it's still, I can see far more deeply and clearly. But if it's really agitated, then everything's distorted. Because there's not a lot of thinking going on, and she's always been like that from childhood. There's not a lot of thinking. There's this stillness that allows things to be seen clearly. But I'm remembering a couple of times, one time, it was one-on-one sort of conversation and asking questions, and just the look on her face as she's listening was absolutely perfect, so healthy. It there was no arrogance, there was none of the vices. You could feel it in a second. You got the entire course of Rash Yoga from just this very neutral, clear, not dead. It was very, very sweet. very sweet. But just you could tell there really wasn't much. It was almost like she was just this open conduit waiting for the answer, the clarity to just arrive, and not even the feeling that she was coming up with anything. She was just this clean vessel, very beautiful. But the other time that I remember is, I, don't ask me why, just don't ask why, but
I
we were
know where this
dressed
is
up as
going.
Minnie Mouse. Don't ask me why. We were dressed up as Minnie Mouse, and it was during a sort of program, cultural type program at the headquarters. And we were dressed up as Minnie Mouse and we were asked to escort her onto the stage. And all the time I'm thinking, what does this look like from her perspective? I mean, Minnie Mouse isn't really something that she's familiar with. So she sees this kind of crazy looking person with a crazy costume approaching her, and it's the same face as always. There's not a single there's sweetness, but there's no reactivity. Just so clean, so clean. It's almost like the look that you get from an infant. Very, very pure. And so there's so much clarity that actually God can use her, if you will. Beautiful instrument for God. So to have that kind of simplicity inside, because I'm practicing soul consciousness, which makes me more and more a detached observer. I just have no interest in these running commentaries. They might come, but I'll notice them and say, I'm not interested. It's sort of like when your phone rings and you check the number, saying, I don't think that's something I need to answer. So it will ring, but I don't engage. So the thought might come, but I can see this is a completely uninteresting thought. And so I let it go. So this kind of beautiful, sweet neutrality that keeps the surface, of our vision very calm so that we can see clearly.
So it feels like when you are talking about that silence of how appealing it feels like, you were saying it really feels like you're underwater in a very rich way.
Mhm.
What happens in that silence where I'm able to then, like, there seems to be such an impact that happens. And of
Mm.
course, the offshoot of what our topic it
Mhm.
is today is this clarity that you can sense things. What's
Mhm.
happening in that silence? Probably among many, many things.
I think that there is, and it's a big topic we're exploring right now. I think there is when we describe silence in spirituality, it is very full of um, eternal qualities, if you will. But what it is empty of is desires and waste. Desires is really a killer for us in terms of blinding us. So, this very desireless state is really the biggest thing that's going on in that silence. We often thought of silence as empty, period. It's not empty, but it is empty of desires. And I'm thinking of a situation today because very often I'll be talking with someone, and if I'm in that very desireless, or we might say contented place, um, you'll suddenly get, we call it a touching, but just a pull to say or ask something, and you're kind of like, well, why? But it's like the perfect thing to say or ask at that moment. So you really are, I often think of it as the way they thought of the muses, in ancient times. You're just this vessel because you have no desires. So you're just kind of available for benevolence, if you will. And there was such a situation that happened today where I was chatting with the soul and felt very content, very silent. And you're often more of a listener when you're in that state. You're listening to those in front, but you're able to listen to common sense as well. And they were sort of going, oh, I have this big, big secret and I so want to tell someone, but, I'm not, I can't quite yet. And I remember being very silent. And I knew that there was, if there was ego, it was like, oh, how valuable I might be if she's the one that she tells this big secret to. So I was thinking, oh, but there was none of that feeling. None of that feeling. It was really strange. But what I did feel is she needs to tell someone. She needs to tell someone, in the sense that to think something through. And I didn't logically get there. I was like, it's I just all I found myself saying, it's okay if you want to tell me. It will go nowhere. It's okay if you want to tell me. And it was very interesting where the conversation went from there. But again, it was sort of like part of me is saying, no, no, I don't need her to tell me. I'm not interested in her telling me. I don't. Yeah. But and yet there was such a strong feeling out of the silence of. But I think they need to tell some. I wouldn't say even I think, because I was having other sort of feelings like leave her alone. But there was just this almost this other thought coming into the mind is how it feels of ask her. And I think we postulated the muses, and in spirituality, as we cultivate a relationship with the Supreme Soul, that feeling of being an instrument for that one, and He's really guiding. If I'm silent enough, and this is why I think Gulzar Daddy does play such a beautiful role. She is silent enough that God can use her. And that's very attractive because God is such a benevolent being, despite different ideas we might have, but really a benevolent being. So if I can be quiet enough that that soul can use me and free of desires, not wanting any recognition or praise, but just content and quiet, so that that supreme being can use me, that would be wonderful. That would be honorable life.
Mhm. It's interesting we're talking about this because it all seems to circle back in terms of how fulfilling silence
Mm,
is, but also that even souls, if they're not even aware they're souls, that they really do register with that feeling, even though they don't know what it is, and maybe we
mhm,
mistaken it for mountains or this. And
mm,
but I was talking to a soul today who, on face value, I've known her for quite a few years. You wouldn't think that she was interested in spirituality,
mhm,
but she was sharing that that she when she goes to visit her mother in Poland, there is one little town she likes to visit, and she'll always take one day to go, which is Krakow in Poland, because there's this church there. So it's interesting because she never talks about anything to do with her faith or if there is a faith, but she goes there to this really ancient church. She always lights 3 candles, one for her mother and two for each of her 2 sons. Um, her 2 sons, but she said that, given this whole online situation right now, she was just sharing, I suppose, that you can't replace online experience with if I was really there. Because she
mhm,
was asking me, are we going to India anytime soon? And I
mhm,
said, yeah, we're having all these online sessions. She was like, seriously, no. She said, I'm sure it's still not the same kind of
mhm.
experience. She was sharing that she said, I can't even explain to you in words the feeling of being
Mhm,
in that church, which is
mhm,
quite interesting because she never talks about anything of any interest.
mhm,
So it must feel like the soul is feeling something,
mhm,
which is very connected to tonight's topic because sensing something and you don't even know that you
mhm.
are feeling something that feels so right.
Yeah, I mean, spirituality deals with the invisible, and we have reached a point where the visible seems more clear to us than the invisible. And so to imagine, a world where the invisible is actually the first thing we see rather than the visible, so that when you meet someone, the first thing you see isn't their face or their gender or their ethnicity. You don't see that, but you sense the being, and how right side up that kind of world is. Is it right to immediately just assess someone by their physicality? Does that seem right? Again, this is how upside down. In fact, it's gotten to the point where people will physically look at someone and come to conclusions based on the physical. Today, I heard a story about this beautiful project. You know, everyone around the world is praising it. It's out of Canada. And, anyways, involves opera singers, classical singers. And, but the interesting thing about these classical singers is they are, I think almost all of them are First Nations. Now, I don't know. We tend not to put those two together. So if someone saw one of these, you know, as they come up and you see First Nations physically, you're we don't think classical. We think a bunch of other stuff, but classical opera singer is nowhere on that list usually. This is upside down. This is upside down when we use the physical, when our physical sight is 1,000 times, uh, more active than our invisible. This is an upside down world. A right side up world is where the invisible is far more clear to us than the visible. So I can have someone in front of me, and I'm really I'm connecting with them. It's a bit like seeing someone's car and coming to conclusions about the driver inside
And
on
we
the
do
color
that
of the
though.
car. We do. So usually, and I think infants actually are quite sensitive to this. This is why they can, get funny vibes from someone who can look very nice physically, but they're like, oh, they're uncomfortable, and they will express that. So they're very sensitive to the invisible, to the vibration, to the feeling, the attitudes. They're very sensitive to that. That's called purity. So that's right side up, right? And so how to, starting to imagine that kind of world where our vision of the invisible is very, very healthy, very well developed.
I'm so glad we have part two because we
Mm,
are running out of
yeah,
time.
we are.
So that's why we have part two, because I think it's a big topic, and it's not
Mm,
just to be enamored with this capacity to, oh, I wish I could do that myself, but
right.
because it is about practicality, because we are souls who are operating, and it's much more than coping with life. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel that perhaps maybe we don't realize we restrict ourselves and make
Mm-hmm.
decisions that don't even honor our sense of self.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I just want to end because I know when we say the invisible, we're not talking about occult or anything like that. We're talking about honor, to be able to really see what's valuable in another being. It's invisible stuff that's valuable, their qualities, their heart, to be very sensitive to that, so that we can honor. And of course, it starts with the self. How do I see the self? Do I only see the visible parts of the self, or have I a very deep, eternal? This is all invisible. So it's not a cult we're talking about when we say to see the invisible, but to see what's really precious.
I'm going to have to make a note for myself to ask that question about how we make decisions based on the visible,
Mm.
whether it's, is that a right decision or not, or about myself and about others. But especially when you talk about the visible,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much more value in the invisible that we kind of sort of lose that.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll just end with a short reflection. As I sit here, I deliberately sit with my physical eyes open because I want to feel a contrast. These physical eyes are like windows in a house. I'm standing inside, looking out through these windows into the outer world. And as I look out, I can observe a connection. Looking out through the physical eyes and the thoughts that are forming in my mind. But I have something called a third eye, an inner eye, that can look at the invisible, what's inside. not the physical, but can be sensitive to thoughts, vibrations, feelings, attitudes, the qualities of the self. So, from looking outwards through the physical eyes, I start to also sense inwards with my inner eye of insight. And can I, at this moment, have a complete read on what I'm feeling and thinking, what state I'm in? So often I don't notice because my physical eyes are functioning so intensely. But even though they're open, can I sense what I'm feeling inside? Not judging, not even trying to change it, just sensitive to what I'm feeling inside. Seeing the self, the thoughts, the feelings, the attitudes, whether there's any pressures on the self, such as fear, anxiety, stress, or perhaps peace, lightness, contentment. Can I even look at myself in a very clear way? Practicing this contrast, looking outwards at the physical and sensing inwards the invisible. Om Shanti.
Thank you for those for joining. So please stay tuned and save the date for next Tuesday for part 2 if this is of useful interest to you.
And if you have questions,
Yes.
please
If you
send
have
them.
questions, send them to us through
Send them
email.
somewhere.
Yes. Well, we actually have it right here, looking in case there are
We
questions.
are.
And again, if you have topics in the future, and these are meant to be very practical, and if challenges for your own self in the study, or just curiosity about the study or spirituality in general. But I'm going to pass it over to you, Judy, and let us know about upcoming sessions.
So this particular activity, interview with the Raj Yoga, is now just once a week on Tuesday nights. But of course, we archive these on the YouTube channel. So if you want to refer to a past one, it's there for you. And we will continue to have drop-in meditation Tuesdays, Thursdays, a full hour on Sundays. Inner fitness will continue. I believe it's power this upcoming Saturday. It's 2 to 3 on our Zoom channel. So that's going to be on the website. We have in English a 90-minute workshop coming up. It's going to be, I believe, I wanted to say September, and that's so wrong. January 16th, is that correct? January 16th, 12 to 1:30 p.m. So that is available as well on the web. Ooh, maybe not yet, because I don't think Eventbrite exists. So just save the date. It is coming. But yes, please go to the website for information, or feel free to email us if you have any questions. And we look forward to connecting next time. Om Shanti.